Awesome. All right, it's so good to see everyone filing into our Zoom room. Welcome, everybody. My name is Marina Wells. I'm Assistant Curator of History and Culture here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, So welcome to the local History Guild, the New Bedford Whaling Museum's free virtual series of conversations. We bring on historians and curators, artists, and other experts. And the New Bedford Whaling Museum, of course, is interested in far more than whaling. So as we ignite learning through explorations of art, history, science, and culture rooted in the histories of people, the region, and an international seaport. So tonight we'll be hearing from scholar Jesse Dritz and artist Carl Simmons about documentary photography and visits to New Bedford made in the 1910s by photographer Lewis Hine, and the changing cultural landscape surrounding the technology of photography, which we're all sort of familiar with today, and its subjects. So we'll hear from Jesse and Carl, and following the talks, if you've registered on Zoom, you will have the ability to ask questions. So keep that in mind as you're listening, folks. And huge thanks to everyone behind the scenes, in particular our team, including Nate Silveira, who's our digital engagement associate, and Beatrice Oliveira, who's our associate director of special events. So shout out to them. And I'm just really thrilled to host tonight's conversation with two people I really admire through their interdisciplinarity and multimedia sort of approaches to art and history and photography. There's an incredibly rich history in New Bedford of photography that not everybody's particularly aware of. I've been lucky enough to be a bit steeped in it as a photography collection curatorial fellow for the past 2 years prior to joining the team this year as assistant curator. So that rich history of photography really dates back to 1841. This first couple of guys, itinerant photographers named O'Brien and Faxton, sort of haul their copper plates through the cobbled streets of New Bedford and snap portraits of people in their studio. And since 1841, obviously, photography has changed a little bit, no longer as many toxic chemicals for the most part. There's this long, variegated history of photography, and especially in this region, which we'll hear about tonight. So I'll introduce our two speakers and then we will hear their talks. So first, to discuss documentary photography, we have Jesse Dritz, a PhD candidate studying the history of photography in the American Studies program at Boston University. She's held positions at institutions including the Boston MFA, the American Antiquarian Society, and Aperture Foundation. And Jesse's writing on photography has appeared in places such as the 10 by 10 Photobooks recent catalog, What They Saw, Historical Photo Books by Women, which was named Catalog of the Year at the 2021 Paris Photo-Aperture Foundation Photobook Awards. Congratulations, Jesse. Stellar. So Jesse's dissertation that she's currently working on considers grassroots student photo publications in the 1970s as alternative practices, which reimagined the possibilities and uses of documentary photography. And then following Jesse, of course, we'll hear from artist Carl Simmons about an amazing project of his he's currently working on that considers photographer Lewis Hine's visits to New Bedford in the 1910s. Carl is a New Bedford artist who finds inspiration in the ways we forget and remember local history, our preference for folklore and mythology over facts, and the contradictory conundrums of preservation. Some juicy stuff just in the intros alone, guys. So thank you for that. So I look forward to hearing everything that these guys have to share with us tonight and to learning from and with you all. So with that, I think we'll get started with Jesse. You can go ahead and share your presentation. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight.
Okay, I'll just unmute myself. Share. All right, can everyone see everything okay? Yeah. All right, I'm so excited to be here tonight to talk about documentary photography and especially to hear Carl talk about his work and talk about that a little bit more. As Marina mentioned, I'm currently writing a dissertation about documentary photography in the 70s, so I'm really interested in what documentary photography has looked at over time and how its visual conventions have kind of built up and changed. I'm really interested in how Carl's work is so bound up in specific histories of New Bedford and so deeply rooted in place, which I think is sometimes something that gets lost when looking at documentary projects from the past. So today I'm here to talk kind of big picture about documentary photography, to think about some framing context to help us start thinking about Hine's work in New Bedford. So one of the weird things about talking about the history of documentary photography, and I think this is probably true of all histories to a degree, is that so much of how we define the lineage of documentary photography was only kind of retroactively defined and placed within a narrative. So while today we think of Hine as one of these kind of great forefathers of the documentary tradition, he was making work at a time when documentary photography as a genre in those terms hadn't even been invented yet. And he died little known and poor, and he couldn't even get a job photographing for Roy Stryker at the FSA. So it's really interesting how like our perception of photographers changes over time. So I want to emphasize two things about this talk before I really dive in. One, the documentary has not always been this fixed genre, but was a type of visual production that was being experimented with under those terms in the 1930s. So we can understand how certain photographic practices before that were precursors to and kind of influenced this very specific moment in photo history. And we can also look at how documentary has shifted and evolved since the 1930s. But I think right off the bat, it's just important to emphasize that when we talk about documentary, we're talking about a genre that was being conceptualized in a very specific time and place. And I also want to emphasize the instability or kind of contrived nature of the lineage of documentary that I'll reference here today. So there are canonical photographers who've been placed in this lineage, but there are a lot of practices which have been left out and could easily be substituted or considered alongside some of the photographers that I'm going to move through. And I think what's so great about local history museums is that, you know, we get to talk about photographers who kind of get left out of these like larger, more sweeping historical narratives. So the term documentary first came into the popular vernacular in terms of photography and film in 1927 when the filmmaker Jonathan Grierson reviewed one of Robert J. Flaherty's films called Moana, which was about everyday life in American Samoa. And Flaherty also made the more well-known film Nanook of the North. And in his review of the film, Grierson touted the film's documentary value. So first, I want to emphasize from the very beginning, the term documentary has been tied to colonialism and anthropological practices. Both Nanook of the North and Moana are ethnographic works, which come from a longer history of colonialist travelogues. And for Grierson, documentary value of the film was the presentation of facts rather than fiction in terms of visual material. So the representation of everyday life. And now, of course, we could say a lot about how the subject matter was selected, how the films were edited, and what was emphasized and de-emphasized. But to Grierson, documentary value suggested this truthful, expositional, and instructive type of imagery. And that hasn't really changed since then, but how we think about documentary has sort of expanded. Documentary photography really started to be understood as a standalone genre in the 1930s. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with, during the Depression in the 1930s, the US government's Office of War Information created the FSA, or the Farm Security Administration, which created propaganda to kind of drum up support for government initiatives during the Depression. The FSA employed 13 to 15 photographers at a time who worked across the country creating images of conditions during the Depression. And they created an archive of hundreds of thousands of images. Some of the most well-known photographers are Dorothy Lang, Arthur Rothstein, Walker Evans, and Ben Shahn. The head of the project was an economist named Roy Stryker, who kind of spearheaded the operation and was employing photographers and giving them shooting scripts, which detailed the types of images that he wanted them to make. And Stryker famously wanted his photographers to make images which imbued, quote, fact with feeling. So not just this kind of factual, truthful document that Grierson's talking about, but also images imbued with this kind of pathos and emotional value in order to kind of convince viewers that the people in these photographs were deserving and indeed in need of government aid when they encountered images in publications like Life and Look. And Stryker thought the pinnacle of this goal was reached by Dorothy Lang's photograph of Florence Owens Thompson and her children at a pea picker camp in Nipomo, California. And this image is so interesting, continues to be so interesting, not only because it does exactly what Roy Stryker wanted his photographers to do, combining fact with feeling. It's this image of strength and poverty, which references religious iconography and really highlights the pathos of this image. But it also has such an interesting afterlife, which kind of exposes the exploitation implicit in documentary imagery. Thompson never received any compensation for this image, and she died in poverty. And I think it's also an important thing to keep in mind thinking about Hine and his images of child laborers who were not compensated for their images when they were used in his projects. So over time, a history started to be constructed to kind of legitimate this burgeoning practice of documentary, but it wasn't immediate. It was this kind of process of pruning and installing new figures. For example, Hine, a photographer who we think of as one of these great forefathers of the documentary tradition, wasn't even included in MoMA curator Beaumont Newhall's 1937 exhibition, The History of Photography from 1839 to Present, which was a sort of landmark exhibition. And it's kind of fun to zoom in on these exhibition shots from 1937 because you can see the categories that were sort of highlighted and important. Like there's aerial, scientific, color, and the closest to documentary that we get is press. But Hine was not included. None of the FSA photographers were included. But by the 1940s, new editions of the catalog that accompanied this exhibition included Hine front and center as part of this really selective lineage of documentary photographers. So the documentary chapter draws this straight line from Jacob Riis to Lewis Hine straight to the FSA as this kind of concerned social humanist documentary tradition. And drawing a line so straight from three photographers is obviously problematic in a lot of ways and leaves a lot out. So I'll talk a little bit about Jacob Riis and why this comparison doesn't really hold a lot of weight in some ways. So in the late 19th century, the progressive era reformer Jacob Riis began to use this kind of ethnographic visual style that we looked at earlier as a tool to photograph New York slums and appeal to upper and middle class people to change the conditions of the poor. His images were arguably well-intentioned, but were often very exploitative in nature and sensationalized. His imagery used an early form of powdered flash to illuminate really dark interiors. And he represents his subjects as these sort of people who are corrupted by their living conditions. And he shows poverty as this sort of dangerous, almost contagious social ill that the upper and middle classes would do well to contain and control. And he would present these images with lantern slides and narrate his experience of creating them. And it created this sort of salacious underground tour of the slums that people would come, and it was this almost theatrical performance, which is very different from what Hine was doing. So Lewis Hine's work comes after Jacob Riis, but again, his work is really different. While Riis saw himself as a sort of mediator between classes who could use photography to appeal to the charity of the rich, Hine made photographs which implicated the capitalist system in which the lower classes worked. Also, Hine's photographs were far more collaborative on the most basic level. For the most part, his subjects were actually aware they were being photographed and had a modicum of agency in that sense, as opposed to Riis, who sometimes kind of barged in on dwellings in the middle of the night, and he used this violent, loud flash, which was literally shot out of a gun. So Hine would have considered Riis's work yellow journalism, And in contrast, Hine saw photography as a tool not only to raise awareness and show conditions of, for example, child labor, but also as a practice which could actually change how people saw and related to their society. So Hine initially came to New York to teach at the Ethical Culture School in 1901, where he photographed new immigrants at Ellis Island. And his photographs capture a moment of encounter between photographer and subject. And when you look at these images, your view is kind of substituted for Hine's, and it becomes this very leveling kind of perspective. And this is the type of imagery he often made when he began working for the National Child Labor Committee, when he was traveling around the United States, photographing laborers and the conditions in which they worked. And Hine's photographs of child labor were used to show how the capitalist exploitation of these kids had real human consequences and real physical consequences. The photo theorist Alan Trachtenberg has argued that Hine's work sought to focus on what, quote, normal vision had been conditioned to ignore. So using photography as a tool to, quote, awaken the viewer's awareness and imaginative empathy. So he was trying to convey to viewers the idea that subjects and viewers were all part of the same world, the same system, the same kind of social web, and they were implicated in the treatment of these child workers. And I think the idea of social seeing, as Trachtenberg terms it, is why Hine's work has been so enduring, because it really captures kind of the core of what social documentary can do, teaching people to see more empathetically, to understand how members of society are all bound up in the same mesh. And I wonder how that philosophy might inflect how we kind of understand these images today. Can we draw connections across time to the people of the past and the conditions under which we live now? How are these stories still kind of written on the landscape? How are the after effects of these images still occurring? There's already been a lot of work done about the people in Hine's images, so tracing the subjects' lives and personal histories and ancestors. And I think Carl's project opens up a door for looking at these images in a really different way than that. Hine's photographs were intentionally connected to place. He almost always included the names of towns and cities, or at least states, where he photographed in his titles. And I think that now that we have the technology and the archives to look at these images more collectively in terms of where they were made, it kind of opens the door to understand these images in terms of their local context and the urban landscape. So I won't talk about Hine's specific New Bedford images. I'll leave that to Carl and to Marina, but I just wanted to raise a few questions about how documentary has been traditionally understood and how Carl's project might provide us with a different lens for looking at these images. So stay on, Carl will speak next, and thank you for listening.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. All right, I'm gonna get into my. Okay. Is that so? Yes. Does that look the way it's supposed to look? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Looks great.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yeah. That was. I didn't know that kind of comparison against Reese, that's my favorite Reese photograph, the ancient lodger. Just the composition of that one with the wooden, the piece of wood and the hand. Uh, So, yeah, Jesse covered Hine, an introduction to Hine, which is great. I just, maybe so I just jump into this first image. I selected, talking about that, the ethical culture school that Hine, became a teacher at in 1901. And that was a little bit of the research I started to do on Hine himself when this talk got brought up. I hadn't really done much looking into Hine himself, and I found it really interesting that this is what he was doing before documenting for the child labor committee. So this is an article he wrote for the Photographic Times about using cameras in the classroom and giving kids cameras to document and how that can be used as a teaching tool. And that's Hine there in the center. And I'm sort of one of the mysteries is like Hine's, as I'm photographing, what I'm doing is I'm using an iPhone, and that's definitely not what Hine was not using an iPhone, you know, I was using it as Graflex and like a maybe like an outdated one. Um, so there are some challenges maybe I'll get into about that one. So this also is at the Ethical Culture School, the top image, called Polly, you know, he's captioned it Pollywogs. He was a nature studies teacher, um, as well as a geography teacher, I think. And so it just kind of struck me like the before and after ish of the work that we know him for. He's doing this he how he got into photography was just that the principal of the school, Dr. Frank Manny, who kind of pulled him into the school in the first place, just kind of said we need a school photographer, is my understanding of it, for events and things like that. So there are other photos which I don't have here. I don't want to do too kind heavy at the beginning, but of like plays, like theatrical performances and costume. That's what he was kind of learning photography, which just that's where he first started taking photos. Um, but anyway, so just the juxtaposition of polywogs, and then the bottom one is wading sewage, lading water. You know, what he get kind of is photographing a very similar composition later in his work. Oh, I keep thinking my arrows don't work. Sorry. So there's Hine later in life. Just to give another visual reference to him with a camera that I don't know if that's a later camera or what. Where he's getting some attention in 1939. He passed away, I believe, well, in 1940, after this. But there's time there. Another challenge when I was taking these photographs is I would like go out and shoot a location and then I'd forget that he's shooting from the hip, like he's shooting from the waist. So if I was trying to get the angle right, and I'm doing the iPhone move, I would be disappointed with my results. So this is the 1911 New Bedford Atlas. So Hine is here in August of 1911 and January 1912. So we have a really great atlas of New Bedford in 1911. So it's really helpful in what I'm trying to do in finding these locations, as far as what maps look like and the information maps give you. So if you can see, I put dots on exterior photos where places where Hine took photos. The orange ones are 1912 and the green ones are 1911. And so you see, he went up and down. He covered quite a bit of the terrain of New Bedford. So it was, yeah, at first when I got into this, I didn't know if these were all like the same mills. And we are such a, as a culture, I think, in New Bedford, such a downtown centric culture, sometimes like to a fault. It's like a big sort of social complaint about the way we talk about New Bedford. It's like we're only talking about downtown. And this is great that there are photographs of places that aren't just downtown. Is rare and interesting. So to get right into it, or not right into it, about time to get into it. So this is a Hine photo, and I had no idea where this was taken, and that's kind of what interests me in this project. Is a lot of times you're just like, oh, that must be one of the mills, maybe is what someone might say, but how do we connect more to a photograph from the past, never mind a Hine photograph or whatever. I kind of have gotten into Hine later when originally I was more into other like 19th century, like T.M. White is one that did a lot of landscape photography in New Bedford and trying to figure out the locations of those. What's interesting about Hine, however, is that the place still exists, barely changed in this instance. Or, that gate is very different. And then it became, how much is this still the same? And became really fascinating for me that if that gate's open, I guess I should say, you can go stand where she's standing in that photograph. And I get kind of, I don't know what it is, starstruck or interested in like, where was Hine standing? And you can stand in that space and look at the landscape from his vantage point. And I guess that's the overarching thing about this is it's not so much super specifically about Hine. It's a lot about the landscape for me and finding these places, though, like I guess the where more than like the why or the how or the what, like who that is. I'm not even sure who that is. And as Jesse said, people have done that work of like tracking down the genealogy and things of these people in Hine's photographs. But for me, it's about I'm a very New Bedford centric artist and feel compelled to be connected to the landscape as much as possible. And I think this kind of image can help other people do that as well. So this is another version of, these are all of the Kilburn photographs that Hine took that are available on the Library of Congress. I don't know much about what else there is not available to the public. And another thing is that this is public domain. These images are public domain. That's a big impetus for this project, is I don't have I don't have to get permissions to explore this as much as I want to and to use the images how I want to. Whereas in other, such as the Whale Museum has a fantastic collection, Spinner has a great collection, and the library has are all great photo repositories. But so this, I like this layout. I prefer this style of laying things out because they're laid out as it could be a million ways. It'd be nice to have all these printed out and play like a puzzle and piece them together, but it's basically like a panoramic view of what the mill landscape looked like, the Kilburn mill site looks like. And then the bottom one is an odd, like, just like across the street. That one took me a little while to figure out, but I'm imagining, yeah, I mean, so the sun, that would be um they're facing what? West. So it'd be toward the end of the day. And maybe that's why they went over there to get better lighting on them. But that's pretty not a very changed landscape there behind them. So now this is the Wamsutta, and when you're dealing with this stuff, it's like kind of rotten stuff. It's difficult material to work with. So this is just this is a lot of, it's called a gauntlet sequence. These females these women are being harassed on their way into work every day. And Hine was documenting this and saying like the things they'd say I've never heard people say before, and taking notes like that are included in the with the photos, not the things they say, but just an observation of vile, I think might be a word he uses. So yeah, it's tough. And honest, Jesse mentioned like exploitation of subject, or that's on my mind as well. Like about exploitation of the material. But it is I, such wonderful photography and such a document of something we don't have. Of all these people, I don't know that there are photographs of these people elsewhere, maybe in family collections, but I don't know that anywhere else we can have these humans documented. So this is the Wamsutta as well. It was in that image. That's still very, very similar as well. This is now like one of our earlier conversion to condominiums, one set of lofts. But the railroad track is what we see there in the distance, and that has like a heavy connection for locals to our train that's been coming forever and is close to coming. Again, this is a gauntlet photo. The key for me to speak a little bit about it is like the rest of the building that you see in the back there. Trying to catch that is how I can see it there just in the bottom, in the distance again, and that's a lot of the work for me is getting it right and getting it wrong, and it's never gonna be exactly right, and kind of finding the happy medium of lining of the alignments. Now Butler Mill is this is in the south end, um, and another one. I don't know that I've seen photographs outside of Butler Mill in any of the repositories, but again, another kind of an area you wouldn't really have. I don't know, not commonly see photographs of. So that's great. And then that one on the far right there in the middle, you see some of the neighborhood in the background. And so that's kind of into the yard of the mill. And then this figure here. And that one worked out good with like the time of day. The way the sun comes down through there is really, really magical. And I just happened, yeah, that's not true. I went there so many times, not for the light, but just because I got the photos wrong. Um, and for every one I have of these, there's all the rest you see in those collages. I just like couldn't get it, I couldn't figure it out, or like just couldn't match it with my lens, or I just got it wrong so many times. But I did get this is one of my favorites. It's that one. Jesse, you mentioned like the deliberate people posing, or being aware that they're being photographed, and a lot of the ones I like are these like that's not so prevalent. They're obviously a lot of blur happening here, and kind of not maybe caught off guard coming out maybe for lunch or something. I'm sure it's recorded when it was taken, but I mean, I guess to speak a little bit about the art without going too much of, it's just being able to stand there. It's kind of just. I don't want to say this is just entertainment for me, but it's enjoyable in a sense to be able to have this connection to the landscape. And now I can stand there and I can see these people in my mind's eye, and I don't want to use the word important, but for me it's important, or for me it feels like the right thing I want to do is in my love for New Bedford is to really see the layers and of time that are, and Butler Mill is a great example of it still being like this is so similar. This little corner here hasn't changed much since Hine. This is summer, so that's August 1911. So this is one of the earlier ones. It's probably sometimes I use the Google Street View and then I didn't get anything better. So it's probably a Google Street View of it, but that's a very this one maybe kind of lured me into doing this work, an early one that wow, you can get that close to the locations and matching them up. That was It's pretty exciting. And even what's changed, like the corrugated door is interesting to me. I love like all these stated signs on here are great. Even this, I don't know if my cursor's showing up, but that little water out, thing, like whole thing is there still. Excuse me. This is so this is a lot of the same people. I say kids, they're kids, but they're like on the older side. Um uh that are on those stairs. And that was kind of, this one's tough when there's no mill in the back and it's just tenements in New Bedford. I mean, it's kind of maybe going to be the south end or the north end, but you don't really know. Um, so this one was tricky, but then I realized it was a lot of the same people in the photo. But oh, I wanted to include like this one I had wrong for so long. I would go back and take a picture of this corner. Like oh my goodness, I waited seasons. Like this kind of work, it's bad to do, or it's harder to do when there's leaves on the trees. So I thought like, oh, when the leaves fall, I'll know it's right. But as you can see, some of the things really do match up, but that's just the way, shed dormer on a tenement looks like. So, but then I did like it clicked and I realized everything was way far away. Sort of a footnote is that the Finest Kind, one of the sequences, the film that was filmed here, Brian Helgeland's film last year, filmed down the street there where they're like rushing out of the apartment building is another like location. So it's kind of a twofer. You go check that one out. In those photos, there's one of these street signs, which that was, oh, that's how I figured out what it was too. It says Abbott Street right on the lamppost there. And that you don't really get too often. You don't get that lucky figuring it out. But on the right, that's the Hine photo, and on the left, that's the Haskell Gardens. There's one of those I don't know, salvaged, or that's still that Haskell had acquired at some point. And there are a few in the neighborhood behind there too, of this older style. Um, very useful in this kind of detective work, I guess, or like figuring out work. Uh, if you can read the street signs on these things. So now we're in the north end, maybe the furthest north he goes. But this is I like this one particularly too. We used it for the event page because if you look at the Hind one, I think I looked at this and said, "Oh, how am I gonna figure that one out?" But then, uh, I don't know. I just how that he's up there. There are other obvious Belleville Ave and Belleville Road um Hind photos, and so you figure, and it's winter, and yeah. Anyway, this one kind of got me back into it. I had shelved this project for a while, and then I went to the Hatch Street Open Studios, which is around the corner, and then I saw, oh right, this is that spot. So these are all the Manamet Mill, Nashua Mills photos, and where Belleville Ave and Belleville Road meet. This is a lot, and this is probably the widest like landscape as far as like how much it stretches. Uh, but There's some details. This was an early one I did too. This one kind of was really particularly interesting for a lot of folks because this area where that shipping container is a house in the 1912 photo, and it's one of those spaces in New Bedford where you knew there's something going on up there. And even the house, once like the wall has a mend in it where the walkway was, it has these other granite pieces that don't really match. So that one has like a nice extra thing going on that it reveals a house that I don't know if we have a photo of the house otherwise. This is more of that area. which another one I couldn't really match exactly, but I also, just as from a artist standpoint, especially the bottom left one, the figures there are really something that I've kind of emulated in my other work. Just the aesthetic of the garments and things are really interesting, and they're also just moving through there, I guess, not pausing to be photographed like a portrait style. Um, this is back down, back east to Belleville Ave and Belleville Road. Um, and this one is the one with, which I think gets reproduced quite a bit on the top right, where the two girls are looking down at Hine. It's a really compelling image. Um, this is probably one of the ones where I realized my camera is not a Graflex camera, but maybe I had kind of figured it out. The one on the left, I think I hit a lot of the points. I learned how to what to line up edges and make edges meet on like count windows and make them meet where they're um, supposed to, or where they do in the Hine photos. But then in the one on the right, I couldn't get at the street view. I was way close in all my other attempts, way too close. Uh, this is a Cushionet mill, which is, I think, I don't know if it's the only not there anymore one. This is the south end. Um, the building there on the right, um, bottom right corner, and then you see it again over here. That's the Cape Verdean Social Club became known as. That's what everybody knows it as, and it was there until not very long ago, when the rest of the mill was no longer there. Sort of, I was experimenting with sort of mapping ideas of putting these red dots on the shed, and that's the shed there, the blue dot there, and there are a couple pipes that are very prominent on this building, on this mill, that would tell me that this was the Acushnet mill, whereas I couldn't quite figure out if it was maybe another mill, but then you'd see those pipes pop up. And then there's that Cape Verdean Social Club, the green. And that one, yeah, as I maybe said, is just completely gone. There's nothing there. But this is maybe one of the places where I forget. I was gonna write down who said this quote, but the map is not the territory, and I think of that. Every time I'm out doing this work, there's almost never not someone parked in there or driving through there or a cop like hanging out in that lot. It's very, and that happens all the time. It happened to me in that I do today. Yes, I tried to get some photos today, and I got one that will be in here. And it's a city. There's always something happening. It's not just waiting for you to come take a picture of it. But you can go and try. Um, time. This photo, I don't have a lot of just Hine photos, but this photo is just so good. Smiling kids, and this other kid here. That's pretty unique for the Hine material. I say this is my favorite one because of this figure in the foreground. Obviously, so Joe here is his name. I forget his last name. Is the subject he's trying to document this really small child, but then this other figure comes in the way, and I let myself. This is my artwork. This is the other artwork that I do, and this piece is directly inspired by that figure. And then this is it's just a tabletop set, and then I photograph it and then photo collage the figure into there. And then this other image on the right is not a Hine photo, but it's in the Willing Museum collection, and it's the inspiration for the background. But that's just a brief aside into the other work I do. But I figured I'd show that kind of Hine has seeped into the other things. Another gauntlet series, and this is another mill that's gone. this is the Fairhaven Mill that we lost, where Market Basket now is and all that. I think Little Caesars for some reason is over there. So this is hard when there's nothing there to reference. So what are my angles of photographs? I guess I have a little bit more liberty, but I try to get close to. But so that red dot is where probably Hine was standing, or where the people in the subjects are standing. And then that's the entryway into the complex itself. Um, but yeah, and then there's quite a series of here. I don't have all of them laid out, but this is my favorite of my pieces here. I wanted to write down this gentleman's name, but we all know he makes these balloon animals outside the McDonald's on Cogswell Street. And he said it was okay to take his photograph. But this is my favorite as far as like sometimes this stuff is just for the historical aspect of it to get to connect these spaces. But then this one, you know, he did a lot of help with the balloons, really make this something extra for me and special. And yeah, here you can stand there and kind of think about it, but it's in your mind of where all these, there are the businesses that are in some of in the photograph. There's a home that's really blurry. The depth of field is really deep or shallow. I forget. I always get confused on that. So here's my yeah, how do I do this when there's nothing there to compare to? We luckily we have this technology where map overlaying is really easy and it's like built in. And then I would like stick my pencil on where I thought Hine would be standing and take a picture of it and like go out there. And I did this a lot. And it's just one example I happen to have still on my phone hanging out. But so that one, I took a little bit of liberties. This is one of the kids in the last photo. He went to their home, and the home is not there anymore. It's like the 195 on ramp and on North Front Street. But the street that's across the tenement across the street from it is still there. So when you look at this is actually the 1906 Sanborn, which is also a really helpful tool for this stuff. And it's higher res, so I could use it in this presentation. It's directly across the street from that. You can see in the map, so you can just go there and kind of imagine where it was. But this, a super heavy image where he says this guy, so like real negative speech about the father in this. We're getting close to time here. This is Logan Street. So this is the winter of 1912. And this is a kind of a map I did with the 1911 map of all the Logan Street area and the it would have been the Wamsutta housing, which you see there on the left. That's the Wamsutta Mill block housing, and people nowadays still know about, still remember the blocks, they called it. And so this is all these, I figured out using maps, and none of it's there anymore except for the Rodman Pond is on the right there, Benjamin Rodman Pond. But the bottom left one in this column is, I don't have an arrow going to it because I don't know where it is. There's not enough context. It's one of the few that are still a mystery to me, but I'm pretty convinced it's part of this sequence. This is the one I took today of each auto body would have been where I think this is 93 North Front Street, an interior he took of a family. And this is Elm Street in New Bedford. Marina and I went and did a little tour of this area. This is one we stopped to talk about. These are kids hanging outside of a pool hall in 1912. And the way I figured this one out, the best I remember, is that in the big window, you can see a building reflected. And then, yeah, I went kind of looking. I think I figured out, like, using the directories where pool halls were, and then found this other building. That's obviously the one in the reflection, uh, on Elm Street, on Elm and Cushing Ave. Um, so this one I did recently just for this presentation, which was I'm pretty stoked on this one. Just I showed this to my 9-year-old daughter without the text on it and said, do you know what I'm trying to say here?" She said, "Oh, all the everywhere the dot is, it's the same spot." So I that part of this is like, not really making s- super art for art's sake, but trying to convey something to people who look at it, some information, and I feel good about that one. There's another newsy one where this one had me flummoxed for a long time because I could not figure out what the building on the far right was, but then realized it was the what's called the White Church, the first Christian church, and that was at Elm and Purchase. And today, finally, I went and I dug up the newspaper to on microfilm and had a very humbling experience with forgetting how to use a digital microfilm scanner. But I took pictures of the screen anyway and kind of, double checked that the date on it is August 22nd, and that's definitely what it is. And yeah, I got to explore that a little bit more. I want to kind of read up on what's happening when Hine was here on the daily basis. But another spot Marina and I went to, and this is Purchase Street. This is kind of the center of downtown. Um, that's the Poor Farm uh, Tavern, bar in the photo. Um, and yeah, I think we're doing Colette Street is another just random one-off North End view that just clicked for me one day. Um, and I love this one because I love what has, um, the change that someone's made that house their own. It's really great to me. And I believe this is the last one of Ms. Luzo Auto Body down at the end. Another kind of difficult one until it clicks. Of just kids hanging out. These some of these kids worked in the mills, but this was maybe a Sunday or a Saturday, and there's a series of those. Okay, I went a little bit over, but 6:22. Thank you. Some good things now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you, Jesse. It was wonderful and a lot of food for thought there. I will now welcome folks in the audience to contribute questions either by raising your hand um, or in the chat also works. Either is fine. There's so much amazing work here. Um, Thank you both for sharing, especially in this sort of venue of thinking about local history. This is so hyper local. Thinking about the sort of street corners and the sidewalks and different buildings that have become sort of a palimpsest of a landscape over the years, sort of written and rewritten over time. It looks like we have a question from Brian in the audience. Brian, I think Beatrice will unmute you.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's a great presentation. I appreciate both of your perspectives on this project. The most surprising thing to me is that Hine's pictures were so photojournalistic and live capture feeling from that time, which is unusual for me. And you're placing them on the empty landscapes in modern times is a really fascinating idea. Have you thought about the reverse? empty landscapes from Hine's times and modern people walking through those landscapes?
Seems like a question for you, Carl. You're muted if you want to unmute.
Have I thought I guess I have not. Empty landscapes. Hine doesn't have a lot of empty landscapes in New Bedford. He does in Fall River. I'm very jealous of some of the Fall River photographs. He's tended to, I don't know why he was photographing buildings in Fall River, but the best of my knowledge, he is not photographing empty, meaning like people on people's landscapes in New Bedford, but he is in Fall River. But yeah, no, I guess that hasn't. I guess I try not to have people in because I'm just like kind of
That's interesting.
working in the landscape and not,
Yeah.
not like working for the press or anything.
Thank you for that question, Brian. I wonder if, Carl, if you would take this opportunity to mention the relationship between the Fall River photos and the New Bedford photos.
Yeah, well, what
That
do you mean? Like,
Lewis Hine took
yeah,
a
he
short
also
time
documented,
apart,
right?
but
They
sometimes
could
are
be like the same
confused.
day, especially those, I can't, maybe the ones with the kids down on the cove. Um, I can't say for sure though, but it might be the same day as some of the Fall River ones too. That they're actually called New Bedford. They say they're New Bedford in the Library of Congress, but they are Fall River, and there's a handful of those that say New Bedford or Fall River, or they kind of lean towards saying they're New Bedford and they're actually Fall River. So yeah, he was here doing his thing, and that's something Marina and I talked about recently, is that he had his what he was photographing, was specifically about mills. And I'm not sure about the newsies, how
Mm.
much those just that kind of happened, and there were like 5 photographs, or if he was, also collecting that. I think he was collecting it elsewhere, but I'm not sure how intentional it was. And in one shot that has the Cummings building in the back, and like where no prob is now, there's a messenger, a bicycle messenger, and I don't know that he deliberately took photos of bicycle messengers, but maybe just took the opportunity since it like literally just probably just presented itself to him.
I think the bit about the New Bedford and Fall River photos being confused and mixed up and just being sort of indiscriminately labeled. Obviously, you have figured out which one is which, but I think it's just such a fascinating set of questions about the role of place in Hine's work. And, if he's photographing everywhere, um, what, could it just be anywhere? Is it important that it's
Right.
New Bedford? And of course,
Just
it's important
anywhere. Yes.
to you, but yeah.
Yeah. It's and we talked about like, are there any pictures of water in a Hine photo? Is the thriving waterfront at the time not on his radar? It's really interesting. And also I don't know the nature of these broader collections. I don't know if you do, Jesse, like what Hine would have like photographed what we don't see or and things like that, or in general, or with Reese, or what we don't see, free to our, on our computers.
Well, I mean, I was so struck by, your point that so many of these images are like people don't know that they're being photographed, which does counter my point. And I think it's because so much scholarship on Hine is about these portrait style photographs. And the photographs that you're focusing on often get left out. And it was making me think of, there's one scholar called Alexander Nemirov, who he has this book called Soul Maker about Hine, which he makes
Oh,
the
I
point.
have that out from the library. Got into it. I have it out. Yeah.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about it,
Oh,
but
yeah.
he's arguing that like essentially Hine is, constituting these children in time in a way, capturing them in a way that they might not have had any other record of them made. And I think that also holds true with the landscape and the buildings, that you're
Sure.
photographing, like he's also kind of soul making in the context of these mill landscapes that we don't have any other record of as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, these
Interesting.
things aren't documented outside of like maybe press, like within the mills, like trying to advertise themselves to other mill, whatever, keeping track of the amounts of cotton they're shipping and all that stuff. Trade magazines and things. This is really thorough documentation of mostly undocumented landscapes, as far as I know, for sure.
We have one last question from Patrick. If you'd like to go ahead, Patrick. Unmute.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that many years ago, I was giving a talk in Providence, and a woman in the audience came up and told me that she'd found some photographs and taken them home from the Child Labor Committee in Rhode Island in 1912. And she had this set of photographs she'd held all these years. And she wanted me to take them to Slater Mill Historic Site, where I was the director. So we took the 75 photos, and we shared a few of them with the Rhode Island Historical Society. Almost all of them were in the Library of Congress collection, and most of them were of Rhode Island. But the interesting thing was we did an exhibit of the photographs using Hine's captions, which were on the back. And the families in some of the photos came to our exhibition. And one gentleman told me that his mother was the small woman standing with the group of workers in the Lonsdale Mill, and that she was still alive. So he arranged an interview, and I went to see her, and it was clearly her. It looked just like her. She said, "Yes, I worked in the Lonsdale Mill in 1912, but that's not me." And she would never admit that it was her. And her son kept saying, "Well, Mother, it's clearly you." And she said, "No, that's not me." And we had another family who contacted us because Hine had written, as you noted, some critical comments in the captions. And he had a photograph of a family making cigars on Federal Hill. But the whole family, children, were in the room. And Hine was very critical of having the small children in the same room where this family was making cigars. And, and he commented that the space was very dirty. And the family really took offense and convinced me by interviews with several members of them that the family liked to have the children there. It was a family activity and that it was clean as a whistle. The woman was famous as a clean housekeeper. So they refuted Hine's criticism of the workspace.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I do love this conversation about place, you know, the placeness of local history guild engaging our neighbors, you know, in Providence. And we have a question in the chat from Jack who says, excellent presentation and work. Question for Carl, Fall River series next. And you know, I think
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I recently did
Carl's
installation at Fall River and got really, yeah, it is like a mirror or something, you know, a very similar place, but totally different, obviously. So yeah, maybe that would be fun.
yeah, there's a lot more to think about this. And another mention in the chat from Beatrice Alder about Carl, are you interested in making the contemporary landscape through murals or walking tours that reference the Hine photographs, for instance? There's a lot of really exciting material here.
Yeah.
We are unfortunately over time, so I thank you all so much to both of our speakers and to everybody in the audience. It really means so much that you made time for this on your Tuesday night. And if you enjoyed this, I encourage you to become a member. I encourage you to, check out our other offerings. There is another local history guild event that we will host in December. History selections called Up from the Depths, as well as a show called Community Blooms by Katie Rodden Walker that'll be opening in November. And I will also be opening a show called Entangled in the Lines, Figuring Moby Dick, and that includes 20th century visual artists' representations of the 19th century novel. So lots going on here. Moby Dick Marathon coming up, lots of exciting things happening at the museum. And I thank everybody for coming and spending your Tuesday night with us. And we look forward to lots more in the future. Thank you both. Again, a little round of applause for everybody who spoke tonight. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for organizing, and this was so great hearing you speak, Carl.
Thank you to Jesse. Thanks for the bigger picture for sure.
Yeah, thank you guys so
Great to
much
hear.
for sharing.